Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Brew Hoop podcast. A little bit of a different episode today. We unfortunately don't have the three's a crowd feel of every episode that we've had to this point. But fortunately, I'm still joined by my compatriot Riley Feldman, who is checking in with me after this delightful whopping of the Kings. Riley, how gleeful on a scale from 1 to that crazy Giannis dunk over Costa Koufos are you right now?
I'd give it probably like on the lower end of average of one of Giannis's posters over Aaron Baines last year. So I'm pretty excited, but I mean, not like jump out of the building excited.
Oh, okay, that's good. Well, I was pretty excited. Those dunks are ridiculous. It's crazy how he keeps raising the bar. Like I really enjoyed the oop, which I think I most enjoyed it because it was slammed through the hoop so fast that it slammed off his shoulder, rammed back into the backboard, and then like could have hit him in the face again. But the ferocity with which he's just delivering these dunks is outrageous.
They're so routine that now the highlight is like whatever face he's doing on the way back, like how quick can the cameraman get to his face? That's what's most exciting about the dunks now, because actually going through and slamming through and, whatever, ripping the net down, that's pretty routine for him. So
his mean mug has to be like one of the more distinctive looks in the NBA. That's like one of my favorite things, especially because everyone thinks of him as this like nice, naive guy, but then that's just such a clear shift in demeanor when he actually is out on the court.
yeah, he looks like he's like trying to do like a raging bull impression. Like I'm expecting steam to come out of his nose, nose and ears. It's so funny. It is totally like against everything, which is obviously a testament to him as a competitor, but it's so different from the Giannis that we know off the court and in any other setting. So yeah, he's quite something.
Yeah, so let's dive right into this. Usually we're not recording right after a game, so we get a chance to have some fresh thoughts. As I was telling Riley before, I had written up a bunch of thoughts in my quick recap and then promptly deleted all of them. So I'm flying off what I can remember now. Riley probably has like a very organized sheet of thoughts, but I mean the Bucks win tonight in Sunday evening, 144 to 109. It really was a thwomping after basically partway through the first quarter. The Kings had run out to around a 15-7 lead. They were scoring a bunch in transition. Bucks looked pretty off kilter defensively. Bud calls a timeout, and then all of a sudden they rattle off an 18-1 run, and they really don't let up from there. Their offense looked a lot more jointed and a lot more like what the kind of offense we've seen all season, progressing forward. Obviously, they attempted 56 3-point attempts today, which is an outrageous number. They set a franchise record, hitting 22 of them. They'd been stuck on that 19 for a couple games. So Pat Connaughton finally broke over that. And John Henson then tagged in 2 more to try and get his 3-point average back up to normal. So this really was a thrashing on all respects. Giannis finishes with, 26 points, 15 rebounds, 11 assists. His assist to get the triple-double was crazy, awesome cross-court pass to Pat Connaughton in the corner to get that 10th assist and give him the triple-double. Still, if you want to pick any nits, which I really don't think we need to in a game like this, but Giannis did have 5 turnovers. That continues to be something that is a storyline we'll have to follow. Riley, what were some of your initial thoughts just coming off of this absolute destruction of the Sacramento Kings?
I thought it was interesting because the one thing about the Kings that you've heard from like a lot of people, I will fully admit that I hadn't watched much in the way of Kings basketball this season. Yep. Sorry, Sacramento fans who clearly are listening to the podcast. But the one thing that you would note when reading previews or like, recaps is that a lot of teams that they were getting wins against, they weren't expecting or they weren't ready for the pace that they play out. And it was interesting seeing that Milwaukee seemed set to kind of fall into a similar trap right off. Like you said, they, went down 15-7 right away. And it was just like Sacramento running up and down the court. And so I thought the one overarching thing that was interesting about the game was the fact that the Bucks kind of stuck to their plan and they slowly but surely ground down the Kings by just sticking to the system. And that's something that we can kind of take away for, the weeks up ahead, especially with the West Coast road trip, but also as the season goes on, the fact that we're going to have to see how many different types of opponents that kind of system works against. Okay, so we played Boston. We can kind of get into that later. So what kind of issues does that give you if you try to stick to your offensive system? You play against a high-tempo Sacramento Kings team, but you stick to your system and you end up, whomping them by 30-some-odd points. So I think for me, that was what was most overarching interesting was the fact that this is a young team that came into in the Kings that came to Milwaukee really quick. Looked like they might have the Bucks on their back foot, but then Bud takes the timeout. They kind of recombobulate themselves, stick back to the principles, and all of a sudden, the game's over essentially by halftime. So that was my main thing. And we can kind of get into a little bit more about, the different players and things like that as we go along.
Yeah, for sure. And comparing and contrasting it with the Boston game is informative, because you think about Boston's as a team led by a coach who's knows that he's willing to potentially shift their style a little bit. I mean, you saw them shoot 55 threes or whatever in that game. And like I said, we'll get into that more later in the show, but that's basically what the Bucks were doing. And then the Bucks got away from their system. It didn't shoot quite as many threes in that game, 29, a season low. But today they shift right back to what it is that they want to do. And the Kings basically play right into Milwaukee's hands that way by trying to pick up the tempo, playing the way that they've played all season. You expect them to want to do the same thing too. They found some early season success with some young players for a franchise that hasn't had much success up to this point. So why would they feel like they should change anything that they're doing when they're on a 5-game win streak? Granted, some of those came against pretty mediocre opponents, but there was a good amount of, small amount of hype surrounding the Kings and their early season success here. But not surprising that they would come in and try and do the same thing that they've been doing lately without an ability to adjust. And they come into the game shooting, I believe they said on the broadcast, they shoot the 4th least percentage of their shots are from deep. So that also plays into the Bucks' hands. Granted, they did shot more than that typical percentage today, foisted up 36 attempts, but it really sort of played out how you would expect a game to play out, where the Kings are trying to rush the ball up and down the court. And you saw really when Milwaukee was able to get their defense set in the half court, though, the Kings sputtered remarkably so, much more so than when they were able to rip it up and down the court. And then, the other interesting thing is that it's a Sunday matinee game, and sometimes those are just kind of weird. And you think about the Bucks. I just remember back to that Bucks game last season where it was a Sunday game against Miami. They lose like 97-79. It really was a horrific performance. And so it sort of felt like trick or treat, the kind of Bucks teams that you would get on Sunday games. And if you look back at their record last year, which I did, they were 5-3 in Sunday games. 2 of those were overtime losses. A couple of those wins were like over the Bulls and the Nets. So take for that what you will. But I mean, you have to be encouraged by the fact that they came out today, took care of business like they have against all season against a lot of these teams, and just really thrashed the Kings and didn't take their foot off the neck.
Yeah, I agree. And it was so much more relaxing watching Buddy Hield take a pull up from mid range versus an Al Horford wide open from 3. That was such a change in terms of my need to take some Tums later this evening. So thank you for that, Buddy Hield. Shout out, Buddy Hield. I would say I'm just kind of like looking over the box score now. Brook Lopez, it seems like he's cooled off a little bit from 3, but I
2
think,
for 9 today.
Yeah, 2 for 9. I think the beauty is, regardless of how slow he's been, the fact, again, that they're sticking to it, because it's so critical that Brook Lopez is out there just to get the offense to work. And I think a game like tonight where it seemed like Giannis finally kind of, it's not like you got a clue, but he finally had like his first fundamentally sound game from like both ends, especially in the offensive end. And it just accentuated the fact that, for the system to work, Giannis needs to be the wrecking ball inside. And for Giannis to be the wrecking ball inside, everybody has to be, willing to shoot from the outside. And to finally see it kind of click for the first time, I think Giannis had a team high plus 39 plus minus, which is insane.
Crazy.
That's super crazy. And so I think that just accentuates the fact that when things kind of click, and as the season goes along, and as Giannis continues to kind of find his place within the system, he's going to put up crazy numbers, obviously, but it seemed so much smoother today. And part of that was and he did have a couple of possessions where like he got, who's the rookie? Marvin Bagley went one-on-one, and like Giannis was just kind of hunted out. Like he would call for the ball walking up, as they're setting the offense to just go one-on-one in the post with him, which is fine. And obviously he scored a ton. Marvin Bagley's the new Jared Allen for 2018, apparently. But I think it's just impressive once you kind of see it all smoothly working, how deadly he is. And again, it was relatively effortless for him, which is exactly what we're looking for as the season goes on, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that you were talking about, it seeming effortless, and I think that's an important contrast from what we've seen so far, because it seems like almost every game so far, it's been incredibly effortful for Giannis. He seemed to be forcing it at points. And certainly he can fall into those lapses again today. He had a couple of those points, but I mean, he only gets up 11 field goal attempts, which is tied for second on the team. Malcolm Brogdon had 11, Eric Bledsoe had 11, Chris Middleton had 12. So a much smaller number than what he's been hitting up usually. And you could really see him fall into that facilitator role. You saw him setting up Tony Snell with that favorite pet play of mine where you hand the ball off to him and Giannis uses his wingspan to try and seal it off and give Tony an open look from three, who, shout out Tony Snell, go 3 for 3 from deep today. Also went to the line to do a 4-point play. We'll continue to ride for Snell. But it's so important to see how Giannis is going to fit into this scheme throughout the rest of the season. And you could obviously tell there's times where he gets frustrated and there's times where he doesn't get a call, maybe potentially. He went to the line 12 times today, so that wasn't as big of an issue. But I really like seeing him in the type of facilitator role. I think that's really when he's maximized, is when he's not getting some of the blinders on. And granted, he has every right to do that because he can take guys off the dribble really easily. But I think this offense is going to be humming at its best when he buys into the fact that he can be this huge facilitator as well, particularly on a day where, I mean, the typical guys who you would expect to get assists, Eric Bledsoe only has 1 assist, Brogdon has 3, Chris Middleton has 3. So I think Giannis as facilitator, as well as to going with his scoring prowess, is but when he goes in with that facilitating mindset, I think that's really when the team is going to hum.
How dare you overlook Matthew Dellavedova's 5 assists this afternoon?
Well, okay,
it's sacrilegious of you. That's
rude, but that was on me.
Delhi fans are coming for you right now. No, I agree completely, and it's been so crazy watching from like when Kidd first came, and like the whole idea of like, oh well, we'll just make Giannis the point forward, and that didn't work out all that well. But in short stints where you're not asking Giannis to do like, I mean, you're asking him to do a lot, but you're not asking him to like, see the play developing way far ahead of time. I remember, what was it? I think maybe a week ago or so, there was the play where he was falling out of bounds and he just like, no look, trying to like toss it back and bounce to Tony Snell in the corner, and how he talked about how the system is designed essentially so that he knows there's always going to be somebody there as a bailout guy. And that makes life so much easier for him, where he can focus on, like you said, taking guys off the dribble or trying to, rush the basket. And if he incurs so much resistance where it's not going to be viable, he knows in the back of his mind, he doesn't have to think too hard about it. Just kind of leap up in the air and launch it out to the corner and find somebody. And whether or not that ends up in a shot or it keeps moving around the perimeter and they can reset the offense. It's so much easier for him. And I think that'll pay dividends, especially as the season goes on, and then in the playoffs when other teams might focus even more on Giannis, and then you kind of choose opponents to pick their poison. Do you try and shut everybody down on the perimeter and then let Giannis feast? And that'll be kind of interesting seeing how other teams, kind of shift throughout the season defensively to account for that.
Yeah, and I think the next level then for Giannis, I mean, obviously he has excellent court vision, is getting those passes to be really precise, putting it right in the pockets for his shooters in the corners. I think that's a super advanced passing skill that's probably going to take him some time to learn. You saw one today where he passed it to Brook Lopez in the corner. It was just a little bit off, and Brook had to sort of adjust his body and get it to rifle it off. But I mean, then you saw the one to Connaughton in the corner, and it was basically right in the pocket, which was ridiculous. But that'll be another interesting wrinkle to see as the season goes on. A quick shout out to Giannis destroying his fellow countryman, Kosta Koufos, who, despite that, was the only Sacramento King who was at least net neutral on the day in terms of plus minus. +0 for Kosta Koufos. That's how
get that tattooed. Get that tattooed, Kostas.
He deserves that. My other lingering question from this is, how many beers do you think Chris Middleton shotgunned last night?
That's a really good question.
So sluggish all day. He really seemed disinterested on the defensive end.
Well, I mean, I guess he's earned that, right? You would hope that wouldn't be the case, but no, I think there's definitely concern about, as he continues to be elevated as the second offensive option, what does that do to him and his effort on the defensive end? Not that, he's horror awful, Jabari Parker bad or anything like that, but it's something to watch. But I think, as even this afternoon, he's still offset by the radical shift in his shot profile, and how many just simple brush screen and then he gets the pass back from Giannis and just takes the 3. Mm-hmm. The fact that is now the end result on the offensive end can help offset a little bit if he's not exactly bringing on the defensive end. But I don't know. It's been a couple of years since I guess you could really call him like a legitimate 3 and D, or at least focus on the D as a, real legit. He's a passable defender, but he's never been, for at least the past couple of years, in my opinion, like a super crazy awesome defender. So
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And obviously, I was just joking about the shotgunning beer, but he looked pretty slow out there today. And it's a Sunday game. He only played 22 minutes, so obviously, Bud's handling his minutes significantly better than Jason Kidd did, who probably would have still had him out there in the fourth quarter. And that's the other thing.
38 minutes all day long. Today would have been a 38-minute game all day long the past 3 years.
It would have been 38 minutes, probably 1 for 5 from 3, maybe 5 for 20 overall. That would have been a really nice Middleton game.
But he'd be 4 for 14 from the Tough Shot Express, so you got to keep that in mind.
So the other thing that I think the last thing I really wanted to touch on from this, because it was a thrashing, and it's going to be interesting to see if the Bucks can carry that momentum forward. So the Bucks basically go full tank at like 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They get Henson in, so it's basically like Henson, Thon Maker, Dellavedova, Pat Connaughton, who gets minutes with the regular rotation people, but also does some of his finest work in garbage time. His 2 denied dunk attempts were spectacular, and then his real dunk attempt was fine as well. But Bucks go full tank at 6:09. They're up 123-95, and from there, obviously you can do the math, but Bucks still win that period 21-14. And I remember it feels like in seasons past, Jason Kidd might go to the tank unit, kind of, potentially in the fourth quarter, if he was somehow feeling fancy that day, wanted to go to the tank unit. He rarely did that. And then the other team would start to chip back in, and then you'd have your starters eventually coming back in. That just felt like a similar refrain we saw these past couple of seasons. So it was encouraging to see the Bucks actually continue to lay it on the Kings. And granted, they mostly had their tank unit in as well, but that was encouraging to see from the Milwaukee side.
Yeah, I got a little nervous there because, like you were saying, you kind of almost get like a post-traumatic stress disorder when like the Kings are hitting a couple of threes and they're still down like 21 points or something like that with 4 minutes left. You're like, oh my God, Giannis is definitely gonna have to check back in, right? Yeah. Luckily, that's no longer the case. And I don't know if it's like you were saying, they had their tank unit out there, and it was interesting because it seemed like the Bucks were just gunning to make any sort of final 3 to break the franchise record. So shout out to Pat Connaughton for breaking the franchise record for made threes in the game, or team made threes in the game, I should say. Yeah, I don't know. You're right that in years past, we definitely would have gotten maybe the final 30 seconds tank team. It's a shame DJ Wilson isn't active right now because human victory cigar, but I thought it was impressive.
It's Delhi now.
It is Delhi. Delhi's passed. They passed off the baton to Delhi, but I think I found it interesting that in the garbage units, I mean, Sterling was out there and he was kind of trying to do a little bit. It was like summer league Sterling all over again, where he was definitely ball dominant. But even then, the system still worked where it was like, okay, John Henson, you're going to get 3, and Thon, you're in the corner, you're going to get 3. So even with the garbage unit where the guys are kind of trying to impress or whatever they're trying to do in the final 5 minutes, the system still sort of functions and it still finds the right shots, even if they aren't going in at as high of a rate as they might have with the starters.
Totally agree. And last thing I'd like to say is the Matthew Dellavedova to Thon Maker alley-oops continue to be my favorite garbage time thing. Today's attempt was Delly just really going for it, and Thon it's like barely even getting his fingers on the ball, which is never a good sign. And then like almost falling to the ground. He looked like if a rim rocker had already like missed the ball and was just like going to fall on a mat there. It was a spectacacular fail. So always keep your eye out for that when it gets to garbage time.
I've never seen somebody with so little lift with as much height as as Thon has. It's so crazy because like he's got this super long body and like he'll only get like a 2-inch vertical, and because he's got really long arms, you're like, okay, well maybe he can get that, but it's just man, the lack of athleticism is disturbing at times. So shout out to Thon.
The best part is that there's like, even if he gets his hands on it, there's like a 75% chance he just drops it.
He'll bobble it. He'll land again. He'll bobble it a couple of times. And and then fall over. It's classic.
There's no worse sight than a Thon Maker getting the ball in the post. It's true. It's true. It is truly delightful though to see him try and do a pivot, and then he just like I don't even know why he like just literally has no patience. He just starts to whirl around and like a. It's
so true. The whirling. He like sticks his elbow out and then he just starts spinning. You're like, you kind of start rooting for him a little bit there. You're like, yeah, you're gonna get this, Thon. You got it. Keep going. Keep going.
It is kind of nice. Well, and you mentioned Sterling just really quickly. He obviously played with the Herd the other night, so it was good to see him get some minutes. And I mean, it's really nice to have the starters be able to rest more. And I think we'll start to have some more of these garbage time minutes where we can really have some of our pet favorites, learn what they're doing. And speaking of pet favorites, it's time for our Donte DiVincenzo highlight segment, which Kyle thankfully came up with a better name for me, so you don't have to hear that terrible. It's on like Dante Kong again. It is time for our Dante's Inferno. So Riley, for many of the games since our last podcast, what is your Donte DiVincenzo highlight from the past couple of games?
That's a really good question. I would have to say the highlight would be seeing Dante's Inferno in person in Minneapolis about a week and a half ago. It was amazing the amount of grit that he displayed. No, what I think is the weirdest thing that I definitely, of all the things that I expected him to do, the thing that I least expected was he would be like one of our most prolific offensive rebounders, or at least dude who flies in for offensive rebounds. So his stat lines still aren't like, he'll have, a pretty good scoring night every once in a while, but tonight, what did he have? Like 5 points, like maybe 5 rebounds, maybe less than that. I can't remember. 1 for 4 from 3, I believe. So it wasn't like a crazy scoring night, but the fact that he continues to get placed in critical like defensive moments, especially in somewhat closer games, I think is still a testament. So I think he got a little bit of burn in Boston, and then in when he was in Minnesota, there was a couple of threes. So I think just everybody in the crowd in Minneapolis having to acknowledge the arrival of Donte was probably the highlight since our last podcast for me.
Yeah, so Dante's final stat line today: 5 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 steals, which feels like the kind of stuff we're going to get from Donte most of this season. He seems like, I think if he scored a few more points, he like might be one of those guys who would make the Zach Lowe All-Stars or whatever at the end of the year. With it's just like guys that do interesting things and are like hustling out there. He always has some interesting guys that he puts on that list. But I'd have to say, I mean, this Donte DiVincenzo is just such a peculiar player. I mean, obviously, it's on record very low on the pick when he came out.
We were both haters.
Yeah,
we were
huge
haters.
Huge haters. My dad told me I was wrong. He told me it's got all the intangibles. He's got all the kind of stuff you want from a player. And I told him, all right, Dad. And boy, if
that right there torpedo his opinion, or your opinion of his right there. When your dad was like, okay, intangibles, you're like, all right, my low opinion of him already went further down. Okay.
But my dad listens to the pod too, so shout out to my dad.
Shout out Mr. Paris,
who also came up with the nickname Red Hot, which I liked as a nickname. I think he'll have lots of nicknames over the years. But the thing that I like that Donte DiVincenzo did, 2 quick things. In the Boston game, he caught the ball. And well, one in transition, he had an N1 finish, but on one, he caught the ball, and I've been so surprised by how quick he is off the dribble when he catches the ball moving. Like he'll come off a screen or come off from the wing, catch the ball, and then like quickly shift his body, drive right into the lane. And he's even had a few like he had a really nice lefty finish in the Boston game against Traffic, which I just truly didn't expect from him at all. Is an ability to finish at the rim, which was really encouraging. And then today, a significantly smaller one that ties much more back to the intangibles thing is Malcolm Brogdon was basically on the right wing, lined up with De'Aaron Fox, and De'Aaron Fox is obviously a tenacious defender, significantly quicker than Malcolm Brogdon. And then DiVincenzo comes over with Buddy Hield trailing. DiVincenzo sets a screen so then Brogdon can go baseline. And then Buddy Hield switches over, but instead of DiVincenzo like rolling or popping, he just like extends his arms out right in De'Aaron Fox's grill, basically stops him and basically blocks him out right out there. So then he can't recover in any sort of way to help Hield. Brogdon gets in. I think he missed the shot, but it's one of those that it's just those kind of little plays that are like, okay, he's you just notice him significantly more on the court than any of these previous Bucks first round picks, when they seem to have an incredible propensity to seem invisible out there.
Yeah, and I think what'll be interesting kind of keeping track of him over the years is you're right that we're all super excited because compared to our previous first round picks, it's like, oh my God, the gates have finally opened. But like, what does an idealized version of Dante, like what does he contribute? Is it just like he does all these small things, but at like a slightly more prolific level, or does he kind of morph into a shooter or scorer and he kind of does the other stuff on occasion? So I think that'll be interesting. Like he's perfect for what the team's needs now in the rotation, like just an all-around guy who's able to do pretty much a little bit of everything. So then what does a couple of years of development, what kind of player does he turn into from here? So I think right now, definitely pleased with everything he's contributing, even if the stat lines aren't like super crazy. The fact that he's getting like something in every single category is worth mentioning. And then we'll just have to see what kind of player Bud morphs him into.
Yeah, and you hope his shot starts falling a little more. He went 1 for 4 from 3, but as of right now, you have to be pretty encouraged from what you've seen. So I think that'll close it up for King's thoughts and Dante's Inferno, of course. So I think the next big thing is obviously, of course, we're not talking about an undefeated team anymore, Riley, which some people obviously a little bit disappointed by in the 4-point loss, 117-113 to Boston last Friday. Really interesting game. I mean, I think by now most listeners know the whole story. Boston really forced Milwaukee into trying to destroy them in the paint. I mean, the Bucks were plus 40 in the paint. And by doing that, they essentially stayed out and stayed on Milwaukee's shooters. Milwaukee only shot 29 3-point attempts, went 9 for 29, 31%. That was their lowest 3-point attempts of the year. Boston obviously nearly hit I'm not sure if you knew this, Riley, but they almost got the NBA record for most 3-pointers made in a game. I barely heard that until today.
Went back to the depths of 2017 of sorts, if you...
but so they go 24 of 55, and obviously the 55 is the more eye-popping number because Milwaukee today gets up 56 attempts, and 55 is like that's like a kind of number the Bucks would hope to do. So you sort of watched Boston play the kind of game that you would expect Milwaukee to play within their offense, and Milwaukee played a kind of game that still had, 111.5 is their offensive rating, which is still really good. And honestly was a little more akin to like what they would do last year, where they have 29 3-point attempts. They get to the line a good amount. Most of their points are coming in the paint. So I think the way I want to approach this though is how we should think about that game in terms of the lack of defensive adjustments on Milwaukee's end. So Eric Nehm, obviously friend of pod, writer for The Athletic, former Brew Hoop alumnus, asked Bud about their base defensive scheme and relying on it for much of the game. And Bud responded to him this way, quote, "We're really leaning heavily on just trying to continue to enforce our principles and just really build habits. At the end of the day, you need to build habits that are getting you through the season and preparing you for the playoffs. Adjusting and things like that are important, and that becomes a habit. You have to be able to adjust, but I would say we are significantly leaning towards just sticking with our principles, sticking with our basic stuff, trying to get really good, really solid there," end quote. So Riley, what are some of your first reactions to, I would say, first and foremost, the lack of adjustments that we really saw throughout the course of the game?
I would say, first off, I'm not sure how adjusting and things like that becomes a habit. That was from Coach Bud there. No, I guess for me, I mean, obviously it was super frustrating. I'm one of the believers that as long as Al Horford walks the earth, we're never going to win another game because God is here to play against. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's the worst having to watch Giannis try and play against Al Horford in the post. Oh, the worst. Anyhow,
I think the worst part is how slow Al Horford still seems.
That's the thing. And it's just
so
like
methodical.
Yeah, it's it's so consistent. It like happened all in the playoffs last year. I'm like, oh my God, if I never have to see Al Horford play the Bucks again, I would be a happy man. But anyways, regarding the question of adjustments, I think for me coming out of the game, obviously super duper frustrating because, like you said, the 3-point numbers that Boston got were something akin to things that we've had to struggle with in the past. And that was one of the concerns with Bud's defense is like, okay, well, if you come up against a team that really works to try and get the 3-point shot, how does that hurt? And it hasn't been that big of an issue. I think we still have like the second best defensive rating in the league or something along those lines, but I'm not too concerned about the need for adjustments. I would say it would be helpful And I think part of if Bud wants to make adjusting or the ability to adjust on the fly a habit, you need to be able to do it or like try it in a game. And we didn't really see that. But at the end of the day, the Bucks only lost by 4 points and they were right in it at the end of the game. And when you're only down by 4 points and you give up nearly the NBA record for threes in a game, you kind of tamp down the worry. But I guess what I'm curious about is because it seemed like they just stuck with the principles again this afternoon against the Kings, and it seems to generally work. I mean, a little bit difficult to start end, or front end, but then Buddy Hield starts taking mid-range jumpers and everything. The balance is returned to the force, so I'm not too concerned about it. Again, we were only 8 games in. Yes, it's super disappointing to lose to the Celtics again, but it's a long season. There's still a lot of time to still adjust, but I think what'll be more interesting is what do we do the next time we play the Celtics, and does anything change? Are we going to run into the same problems? And if that's the case, then you start worrying about, okay, do we even have the capability to adjust? And is adjusting just going to be like going back to the, trap heavy defense or something? Are players going to fall back on Jason Kidd isms on the defensive end, and that'll be an issue? So I think that's the only thing I'm really concerned about, 9 games into the season at this point.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about after it was because you were talked about falling back into Jason Kidd-isms, and there was one particular play where Giannis like super overhelped onto Aaron Baines. And I know Aaron Baines like shoots threes now, but Giannis like went for the steal as opposed to just holding on to him and allowing Milwaukee to rotate and that kind of stuff. And you've seen that happen, at points throughout this year, which I think is realistic. I mean, they had this specific scheme that was hyper organized and hyper detailed that they had to try and follow for 4 years, the majority of them. And so shifting into this new scheme seems like it probably is going to take a little bit of time. And obviously Bud believes that too, which is why he wants to stick with it. But you saw them shift into some of the, same tendencies against Boston. And I was curious whether maybe it's even part of this is like some sort of mental thing where they like know last year against Boston, like they had a lot of success against them. They took them to 7 in a playoff series. They know that a lot of the stuff that they actually did worked for the most part. I mean, they were really close in that entire series. So I wonder if there's some weird sort of mental crutch that flipped in and they started to revert to some of the stuff that they were doing last year. Granted, yeah, they have new players in, but I mean, the majority of the guys like Giannis and Chris and I mean, obviously Eric Bledsoe, who looked just as bad as he did last year in the playoffs. I wonder if there was some sort of mental hitch that clicked in and forced them back into these old tendencies.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like in the fourth quarter, when the Bucks were making their comeback, it was like almost all Giannis fueled. It was like, all right, just give Giannis the ball and get the hell out of the way. And I thought that was interesting because like if Bud is over here preaching about the fact that we're just going to stick to our plan, we're going to stick to the system and we'll build habits and this, that, and the other thing, how does he grapple with the fact like, okay, Giannis is really hot right now. And every time he gets the ball, he's going to score. So, are you willing to scrap? And that, I'm not sure if that really feeds into like mental lapse and kind of, falling back on tendencies that they built throughout the playoff series last year. But I think that's another concern is like, how flexible will the system be if Giannis is going supernova? I mean, obviously most coaches just ride that out, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was necessary. I think Boston just gives us trouble, unfortunately, which is a pain in the butt, but there's a whole season to figure it out. But they have like the exact personnel to give our personnel trouble. Again, it was super frustrating seeing Eric Bledsoe struggle against Boston. It would have been great had he been able to redeem himself, but it's just interesting that this is the opponent, the one that we, like you were saying, we went to 7 games. They were the ones that knocked us off our system and, put things into dysfunction for the first time after an awesome 7-game start. So I thought that was interesting. The fact at the end that they went away from that system as well. And, was that just a game thing? Is that something they're going to go to in the future? What does that imply for the future?
Yeah, I think I'm writing. There'll probably be like I'm writing this now, but I'm working on a companion piece basically to this sort of discussion, going further into this too, and questioning, how much should we rely on Bud showing adjustments? Should he be showing that? Does it even matter with a team that's still this young and trying to prove it? So, but I think the interesting thing is too. I mean, Chris Middleton had terrible shooting game, and he destroyed last year in the playoffs. I mean, he went just 6 for 18 from the field, 3 for 10 from 3, and he was a human flamethrower last year. So there's also that factor of it. And then the other thing that I was kind of thinking about was, obviously they have those. The defense, I think, was what really stuck out to people, and we just talked about how the offense might be the more actually lingering, interesting question about whether that's something that just Boston can do or if that's something that other teams can cause Milwaukee to get into. But the defense, quite clearly, Boston found a unique way to try and attack it, which was the clear pick and pop ability. And you're right, Al Horford is uniquely suited to cause us nightmares for years because he can shoot the three. He can also attack kind of off the dribble if someone comes out after a pump fake. So he has a lot of capability as fives, and Boston just has those kind of shooters. Like they have the kind of depth of people that can go at the five and destroy on pick and pops and force the Bucks centers to try and troll out more. Brook Lopez obviously kind of got caught quite a bit in the middle of those while he was doing what he was supposed to do, which was drop, and Bud didn't really adjust to that point until I thought he broke out just a little bit of switching to start the first part of the fourth quarter, but they didn't really stick to it to any degree. But at least seeing that, I mean, it made me a little, I mean, I think it's silly to feel like that disheartened by it, but it made me heartened also to see the fact that it's like, I mean, they know that like they're probably going to have a switching scheme that they can break out. And so seeing it in there, it's like they're clearly kind of drilling this in practice. So I think the question for me then is like you start to think about, okay, what are the goals that you're trying to do for Milwaukee this season? So I was listening to the Low Post, and he was talking about how it's been well documented that like Houston is like, okay, literally all we are trying to do this year is beat Golden State. Like we're going to drill this switching defensive scheme. You drill it into your brains beyond belief so that when it comes time that we face them, this is exactly, we know exactly what we're going to do. So it's an interesting team building question then for Milwaukee is like, yeah, I think first and foremost is instilling Bud's scheme to this point. But the question will be, like you said, is Boston the team that can completely flummox the scheme and put it out of commission? And if that's the case, maybe that's a question for next year. Maybe we'll have to wait till next year to figure that out. And then Milwaukee gets more hyper focused on that when we know what this team is capable of. But that was something else that kind of stuck in my head.
Yeah, and I think I'm not super concerned because, we kind of win with the system. Like you said, put the system in place if you can get a top 4 seed. Whereas like for Houston or any other team that's gunning for Golden State, they have like, this one juggernaut in mind. Whereas, I mean, I think the end results that the Bucks could be happy with are a lot more, wide ranging. There's a lot more variance in it. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe if you run against the Celtics in like the Eastern Conference Finals, and again, you have difficulty with it, then maybe you lock in. But I think this is all just kind of a part of the larger conversation where one of the main like knocks on Bud as a coach that I had heard other people talk about was the fact that over the course of a playoff series, he might not be the best in the way of adjusting the system, depending on what the opponent is doing on a game by game basis.
Same.
So just kind of seeing how they plays out throughout the season series with like the Celtics or any other team that happens to give them trouble that'll kind of give us an idea of, is this proof in the pudding? And then you can kind of also give them a little bit of a break. Because again, like you said, this is the first season under Bud. They're 9 games into it. If they get to the playoffs and they have a high seed, the issue will be trying to keep expectations at a reasonable level, because even though the team looks awesome right now, who knows how that's going to play out by the time the playoffs come and you're facing off against teams that might have more ability like Boston or have the personnel to be able to adjust and give our normal system an issue or give it issues. And then, does Bud adjust to that? If he doesn't, or if we have difficulties and it doesn't really work, then maybe you kind of come back in the offseason and say, okay, well, what is it that we need to fix? Or do we just find more people who are even better for the system? So that'll be interesting to see how the Bucks tackle that philosophically.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else lingering from the Celtics game that you wanted to touch on?
No, not really. I think it's just more proof that Milwaukee's a small market team, that they, went out on national TV and they just couldn't win the big game again. No, for me, it was frustrating, but part of the beauty and it's really fun, like dominating teams by, however many points we end up with, like 17, 18 points on a nightly basis. But part of the reason why we watch the games is to get close games, close, compelling games. There's like, okay, they score and then we score and it's 4 points. So even though it was really stressful and disappointing that you lost, I thought it was a really fun game to watch, and I look forward to seeing, the next time we match up against the Celtics. So I'm not too worried about it 9 games into the season, or it was 8 games at that point. Don't read too much into it, people.
Yeah, and it felt different from the Bucks' other close games where the Milwaukee seemed to be ceding the lead to like Charlotte. They were able to make a comeback. This one was a lot of Milwaukee having to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and make a comeback, and it felt like an interesting chess match between teams that you hoped will meet in the playoffs. And losing by 4, I think, is pretty encouraging for this Milwaukee team. So, yeah, I think we'll not a whole lot else to touch on. I mean, that's the beauty of a team that's kind of humming along and slaughtering opponents. So I think the most important thing for us to look to next is this West Coast road trip that's coming up. So Milwaukee is going to kick off on Tuesday, the 6th, game at the Portland Trailblazers. Starts at 9 p.m. tip Central. And then Golden State's on Thursday, 9:30 p.m. Central tip. LA Clippers on Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central tip. And then Denver on Sunday, a 7 o'clock Central tip. Which of those games are you most intrigued by, Riley?
I would say for me, it's probably the Denver game because, I mean, Golden State is Golden State. They're just like a more perfect version of themselves. So even if you lose, that's just their Golden State. So I'm not too worried about that. If you make it competitive, great. Clippers, I don't really know what to make of them. They're kind of to be determined. But I think the Nuggets are, what's their record right now? I'd have to look.
I'll go on and check. Yeah.
Yeah. They also, I want to say they're like 7-1 as well, but they look like kind of like how the Warriors are a more idealized version of themselves. The Nuggets seem to be an even crazier version, and they've improved the defense. And I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I think last year when the Bucks went to Denver, they got just absolutely hammered, which is pretty common for teams that visit Denver on their home court. So I think facing off a team that's heavily reliant on 3-point shooting, but has a guy like Nikola Jokic, who is the distributor and kind of like everything runs through him, and how different of a challenge that is for a defense to kind of deal with. Seeing how we were just discussing, does Bud adjust at all, or do we just try and run our normal system out there and see how it functions? And, are we going to get drilled by 30 unending threes and Jokic, schooling people on the inside, or how are we going to adjust? So I think for all the games that are upcoming, that's the most interesting to me.
Yeah, and Denver, just to clear up a few things, Denver is 8-1. Interestingly, they play at the 24th fastest pace. But their numbers, they're ranked, this is per NBA.com, they're ranked 11th in offensive rating right now. And then net rating, they're 3rd. And so a lot of that is due really to their, like you said, their significantly improved defense. And everyone knew that they would be a juggernaut on offense. I mean, they have tons of players. Jokic is such a fascinating player. So I think seeing how Milwaukee chooses to attack them, because clearly Jokic can shoot from 3. Jokic can also dribble in and distribute incredibly well. So it'll be curious to see how the dropping scheme works against or for Milwaukee, if he's able to kind of pick people apart, if Milwaukee moves Brook or anyone else up a little bit to try and see if he can counter that kind of action. And obviously they have a good amount of shooters, and so I think it's going to be an interesting chess match. Especially Paul Millsap can be a brutal defender, so that should be a tough matchup for Giannis as well. And I'm really I think I'm very intrigued by that one as well. The one that I'll pick, I guess, is Portland. And Portland, I don't know. I feel like we kind of know what Portland is. They're a similar team to what they've been in the past. They have obviously Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, 2 guards who hypothetically could destroy Milwaukee's defense in a similar way that Kemba Walker did in that first game where they're able to pull up from 3. Dame Lillard it's not shy at all about pulling up around a pick. So I think that's going to be a huge game for Eric Bledsoe, Malcolm Brogdon, and Dante DiVincenzo. It'll be curious if Dante gets a chance to go against CJ or even Dame, because he has an amazing ability to slither around screens. So I think it's going to be a huge game for Milwaukee in that respect. And I think Giannis and company can probably feast down low. But I think obviously it's most intriguing to see how the Bucks defense handles those 2 lead guards.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing. I think definitely on this entire road trip, emphasizing watching how the defense functions, because as we've seen game after game, the offense that the Bucks are running out there is pretty damn potent, and it can kind of move around a little bit depending on who's hot and who the emphasis is going to be on. But you have four relatively different challenges. And I mean, Golden State is obviously its own, beast all on its own. It's its own beast, but I think it will be fascinating focusing on the defense and seeing who gives it fits, what kind of players gives it fits. Does it still continue? Like you said, is it the guard who can make you pay for dropping deep on the pick and roll coverage? And then how do you deal with the big man who's able to facilitate? So I think there's a whole bunch of different challenges that'll make the West Coast interesting, even if we have to stay up till 1 a.m. to watch all the games.
Yeah, living out on the East Coast, I'm really looking forward to staying up for that Golden State one. Excited for that one to finish up at 1 o'clock my time. Well, and so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's not like you have anything to do the next day. Hopefully.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, Friday work. I hope they don't listen to this. But and I think, I think you're right. So that's something that I've been was probably the most intriguing part of the Boston game is that we saw. I mean, we all kind of knew that the potential first issue with this offense is if you have an elite lead guard who's able to pull up from deep, and it seems like a worthwhile gamble. And then the second one that we've kind of seen here is if you have a five who's able to pick and pop and is a really good modern stretch five, which again, seems like a worthwhile gamble, particularly in the regular season when you're able to rack up wins against teams that don't really have that capability. When it comes to the playoffs, like we said, it'll be interesting to see what adjustments might be made in a 7-game series, if that's the case or not. But this will be an excellent litmus test to test both of those things, as the Nuggets clearly run a lot of their offense through their five, and then the Warriors and Trailblazers, all about them. Their guards are going to take center stage and shoot ridiculous shots, and I don't know. It's always entertaining, and Giannis seems to always really get up for the Warriors game too. I know Kevin Durant is someone that he always looked up to as well. So I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, it should be a set of 4 good games. So do you have a prediction for how the Bucks will fare on the road?
100%. So let's go over our predictions from last time, just so people know that we are keeping tally. Kyle guessed 4-1. Adam guessed 3-2. Riley went for 5-0. Sorry, I went third person there. And the actual record
was a little weird. It was like a record scratch. Like, what's happening?
And the Bucks actually obviously went 4-1. So kudos to Kyle, who was at the game today and seemed to be having a jolly old time, and periscoped with Brew Hoop Brethren, Gabe Stoltz as well. Shout out to Gabe. So Kyle's definitely had my pessimistic view. May have colored my current prediction then for these next 3-4 games. So I'm guessing the Bucks go 3-1, and so I'll say the one loss is against Golden State. I think I'm gonna place a vote of confidence in this team and see if it pays off. So I'm going 3-1. What about you?
I am going to guess 2-2. I think one of the losses will be at Golden State. Like you said, they usually get up for it, and it should be a good game. I'm looking forward to it, but I don't think with the way that they're playing right now that the Bucks have enough for them. And I think the other loss will probably come at Denver, and that's only just because of history until the Bucks start consistently winning on the road in Denver, which you have to wait a year between games. But I don't know, they're just super red hot right now, and it's just a tough place to play. So, and then Clippers, I have no idea what to make of them. Like I said, they're kind of on the in-between, and then we seem to have had Portland's number at least last year. So I think Giannis will have himself quite a night on Tuesday against the Trailblazers. So 2-2 for me.
Yeah, I think one of that early season game last year against Portland, didn't Giannis have like 44 or something?
That got the potential, like the super low hype buzz for MVP. That was like his announcement that Giannis has finally arrived, was against the Trailblazers.
Yeah, that was like that was definitely the epicenter. And then Kyle, of course, needed to get in his picks as well, and he sent them in from the road. He thinks they're going to go 2-2, beating the Warriors and the Clippers. Riley, insert what Kyle's commentary would be here.
No, I don't have a good Kyle impression. I have to work on it a little bit. Maybe I'll work with him in a one-on-one to try and get a good impression down. But I'm sure he would say that he has all the confidence in the world that the Bucks would get up for the Warriors, and that the Bucks would also get the revenge game against Tobias Harris and the LA Clippers because Tobias left us. How dare he? though he didn't actually leave us. He left us via trade. So
yeah, I think Kyle has a lot of revenge, feeling
in his heart,
for those losses. I think he might also say Hype Train travels a little slower, than the flights typically might. So maybe they're going to be a little sluggish out there in Portland if they're going by train. So I think
you're right that a win over the Warriors would definitely get the Hype Train started right back up. Like any sort of win on the road against the Warriors would get it started. So maybe that's part of his secret hope.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kyle, for throwing that in, and I hope I bet we did it exactly justice. It's precisely what you would have said. All right. Well, I don't know. You got anything else, Riley? It kind of feels like it is weird to just keep talking about seeing the Bucks just destroy a team. I don't know, like night after night. It's kind of bizarre to me. It's been a weird adjustment.
It is really weird. I mean, even the most optimistic, people among the fan base / in the Brew Hoop comments and things like that, I'm not sure if anybody would have seen an 8-1 record to start the year as realistic. So it's just kind of bewildering, and we'll just see. I think this West Coast road trip, it might be a little difficult. So it might be the first real bitter pill to swallow. I mean, losing against the Celtics was, but you had to lose at some point. But to finally start running into consistent trouble, if that's the case, I think it'll happen on this road trip, and that'll be difficult. But again, early in the season, everybody keep their heads up. We'll be fine.
Yep. It's a long process, and I mean, the Bucks racking up these wins. It's starting to get to the point where it's going to be tough for this team to be in the bottom, to even try and approach the bottom half of the East. I mean, even now at 8-1. Even if they went 500 the rest of the way, they win roughly 44, 45 games. I mean, that's a really good number for this team. So, I mean, this early season success is really setting them up for, even if they happen to go through a dry spell here and there, it's putting them in a good position to potentially take a place atop the Eastern Conference there. So,
agreed.
All right, Riley. Well, we're going to sign this two-hander podcast off, and we'll talk to everyone next time. Make sure to review us and subscribe to us on iTunes. Obviously, check out Brew Hoop. We'll have plenty of stuff on the site as you're listening to this. Riley will have his weekly Monday morning media roundup, which is always a required reading for me. And I'll have a piece dropping today as well about the how to handle some of the team building aspects and systemic stuff that may have been broached a bit in Boston. So make sure to follow us at BrewHoop on Twitter. Riley, what's your Twitter handle again?
I am at Riley Feldman, and that is with 2 N's on the end.
And I'm at Adam R. Paris. I've even tweeted a few times lately during games.
Super active. It's really throwing me off to just be sitting on the Twitter feed and then all of a sudden see you tweeting, and it's not hyping up the podcast. So welcome back to Twitter.
It's been enlightening. So, and we hope that this conversation has been enlightening. Let us know any feedback you have for the podcast too. If you guys have stuff you want us to talk about, we're always interested in more questions. Maybe at some point, if the Bucks keep winning here, we'll have to throw in a mailbag. So thanks again for always listening. It really does mean the world to us, and we'll catch you next time.